Most people assume the difference between someone with a modest net worth and someone with real financial security is income. If one person retires with $400,000 and another with more than $1.6 million, the obvious explanation seems simple. One must have earned far more money. But in many cases, that assumption is wrong. The median American household earns about $84,000 a year, yet financial outcomes still end up dramatically different decades later. Two people can work through the same economy, face the same prices, and earn similar salaries, and still arrive at retirement worlds apart. The twist is that the gap often begins with decisions so small most people never notice them. There is a pattern behind this difference, and once you notice it, it becomes difficult to ignore. Many researchers and financial writers refer to it as a behavior gap. The idea is simple. The gap between what people earn and the wealth they ultimately build is often driven less by income and more by the decisions they make repeatedly over time. Before we go further, it's important to clarify something. I'm not a financial professional, and nothing here should be taken as formal advice. Think of these examples simply as illustrations meant to make financial ideas easier to see and easier to understand. When you look at the numbers across the United States, a strange contradiction appears. The median household income is roughly $84,000 per year. That's a solid income by historical standards. Yet by the time many people reach their early 60s, the median net worth is only around $400,000. Meanwhile, the average net worth for people in that same age range can exceed $1.6 million. Those numbers reveal something important. If income alone determined financial outcomes, the median and the average would not be so far apart. Instead, what we see is a wide spread of results inside the same economy. Some households gradually accumulate assets over decades. Others earn reasonable incomes, but see little long-term growth in their net worth. The difference rarely comes from one dramatic event. It usually comes from patterns of behavior that repeat quietly for years. Small spending decisions, lifestyle upgrades that follow every raise, money that arrives unexpectedly and disappears just as quickly. None of these choices feel dramatic in the moment. In fact, they often feel normal. But over time, they shape the financial trajectory of a life. Understanding this pattern matters because it shifts the focus away from a single question. How much do you earn toward a more revealing one? What do you actually do with the money that passes through your hands every year? To understand how this gap forms, you have to zoom in on the mechanics of everyday financial decisions. Not the dramatic ones, not the once-in-a-lifetime choices. The ordinary decisions that happen dozens of times every month. One useful framework is something called the 1% rule. It's a simple guideline for discretionary spending. Before making any non-essential purchase, compare the price to about 1% of your current net worth. For example, imagine someone whose net worth is about $35,000. 1% of that is $350. The rule doesn't say you can't spend more than that. It simply asks you to pause and think before you do. Now consider how small habits accumulate. Suppose someone regularly spends around $320 each month on purchases that feel minor in the moment. New gadgets impulse online orders upgrades that seemed justified at the time. Individually, none of these purchases look dangerous. But over a year, $320 per month becomes about $3,840. That money is no longer available for saving or investing. And more importantly, it no longer has the chance to grow. Financial outcomes are shaped not only by what you earn, but by the distance between income and spending. The wider that gap becomes, the more capital you have available to build assets. Now consider another common pattern: lifestyle expansion. Imagine someone receives a raise that increases their annual income by $12,000. On paper, that should create new financial breathing room. But in many cases, spending rises almost immediately. A nicer apartment, a slightly newer car, more frequent travel, dining out more often. If most of that $12,000 disappears into lifestyle upgrades, the raise changes daily comfort, but not long-term wealth. But imagine a different outcome. Suppose spending rises by only $3,500 and the remaining $8,500 per year is consistently invested instead. Over time, that difference compounds into a meaningful asset base. The decision itself doesn't feel dramatic, but repeated year after year, it quietly shifts financial outcomes. Another mechanism that shapes wealth is the size of large recurring expenses. Many people focus their attention on small savings things like skipping coffee or cutting minor subscriptions, but the largest financial decisions usually sit elsewhere. Consider transportation. According to the American Automobile Association, the average annual cost of owning and operating a new car is about $11,500. That includes depreciation insurance, fuel maintenance, and financing costs. Housing expenses are another major category. In many households, annual costs associated with maintaining a home, insurance, property taxes, utilities, and repairs can easily exceed $21,000 per year, even before mortgage payments. Travel is another area where spending can quietly expand. The average vacation now often costs around $7,000, and international trips can approach $10,000, depending on destination and duration. None of these expenses are inherently wrong. Cars, homes, and travel can all add value to life. The key point is scale. Decisions in these large categories have a far greater impact on long-term wealth than most people realize. If a household reduces transportation costs by just a few $1,000s per year, that difference may eventually translate into tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional net worth over time. This is why the wealth gap inside the same income bracket can grow so wide. It's not always about earning dramatically more money. Often, it's about how consistently someone preserves the gap between what comes in and what goes out. And once that gap exists, another powerful force begins working in the background. Compounding. Money that remains invested does not simply sit still. Over time, it generates returns that begin generating returns of their own. At first, the growth looks slow, almost invisible. But as the years pass, the curve begins to steepen. What started as small decisions gradually becomes a very different financial trajectory. At this point, the mechanics seem clear. If small financial decisions compound over time, then the logical solution should be simple. Spend a little less. Invest a little more. Repeat consistently. Yet most people do not follow this pattern. Not because they are irresponsible and not because they lack intelligence. The real reason lies in how human psychology interacts with the modern economic environment. First, there is the emotional side of spending. Money is not purely mathematical. It is deeply tied to how people feel. After a stressful day, buying something small can feel like relief. After a difficult week, ordering something online can feel like a reward. These decisions are rarely framed as financial choices. They are framed as emotional responses. The problem is that the emotional benefit is immediate, while the financial cost is delayed. A purchase might create 10 minutes of excitement, but the money that disappears could have spent years quietly growing if it had been invested. Human psychology tends to favor immediate satisfaction over distant outcomes. Behavioral economists sometimes call this present bias. We naturally give more weight to what feels good today than to what might matter decades from now. Second, there is the influence of comparison. People rarely evaluate their financial situation in isolation. Instead, they compare their lives to what they see around them. A coworker buys a newer car. A neighbor renovates their kitchen. Social media shows vacations, upgraded homes, and new technology. Gradually, expectations shift. What once felt like a luxury begins to feel normal, and what once felt normal begins to feel inadequate. This phenomenon is sometimes described as the hedonic treadmill. As lifestyles improve, satisfaction quickly resets to a new baseline. The result is a subtle but powerful pattern. Income rises, spending does alongside it, and wealth accumulation stalls. Third, there is the role of systems. The modern economy is built to encourage consumption. Advertising platforms study human attention. Retailers design promotions that create urgency. Credit systems allow purchases to happen instantly, even when the cash is not available. None of these systems exist because people are foolish. They exist because they work. When someone scrolls through an online store and sees a limited-time discount, the environment is designed to trigger a quick decision. When a credit card allows a purchase to be made in seconds, the friction that once slowed spending disappears. Saving and investing, by contrast, often require deliberate effort. Forms must be filled out. Accounts must be opened. Transfers must be scheduled. The path toward long-term wealth is quieter and less emotionally stimulating. There is also the problem of visibility. Surveys suggest that about 67% of Americans do not track their net worth. Without a clear measurement of assets and liabilities, many people rely on vague impressions of their finances. If the bank account balance looks stable, it feels like everything is fine. But net worth tells a deeper story. It reveals whether debts are shrinking or growing, whether investments are expanding, and whether financial progress is actually happening. When something is not measured, it rarely improves. Understanding these psychological and systemic forces changes how we think about wealth building. It suggests that financial outcomes are not only about discipline, they are also about designing environments and habits that make better decisions easier to repeat. In other words, wealth is not just built with knowledge. It is built with systems that help you act on that knowledge consistently. Once you understand how the gap forms, the next question becomes practical. What can someone actually do about it? There is no perfect formula for building wealth, and everyone's financial situation is different. What works for one household may not work for another. And again, none of this should be taken as professional financial advice. These are simply examples meant to illustrate how different strategies might work in practice. The first step is surprisingly simple: measure your financial position clearly. Net worth is calculated by subtracting what you owe from what you own. Assets include things like savings investment accounts, retirement funds, and home equity. Liabilities include mortgages, student loans, credit cards, and other debts. When you write this number down, something important happens. It transforms a vague feeling about money into a measurable reality. Instead of asking, "Do I feel financially okay?" you begin asking a more precise question: is my net worth moving up or down? This is why regularly tracking net worth can be powerful. Many people find that checking it once every quarter is enough to see long-term trends without becoming overly focused on short-term fluctuations. The second strategy involves automation. Human discipline is limited. Motivation changes from week to week, and financial decisions often compete with daily responsibilities and emotional stress. Automation removes that friction. For example, some people arrange automatic transfers so that when income arrives, part of it immediately moves into long-term investment accounts. Others schedule automatic contributions to retirement plans or savings accounts. The advantage is psychological as much as financial. When money moves automatically, the decision no longer has to be made repeatedly. The system does the work in the background. Over time, even relatively small automated contributions can build momentum. A few $100s set aside consistently each month may not look dramatic at first, but over years, those deposits accumulate and compound. Another strategy involves using tax-advantaged accounts when possible. In the United States, several financial structures exist specifically to encourage long-term saving. For example, the contribution limit for a 401k plan in 2026 is $24,500 for individuals under age 50. Additional catch-up contributions are available for older workers. Individual retirement accounts also provide opportunities for tax-advantaged investing. In 2026, the annual contribution limit for an IRA is $7,500, with additional catch-up contributions for people over 50. Health savings accounts offer another example. For 2026, the contribution limits are $4,400 for individuals and $8,750 for families. These accounts are designed to reduce the tax burden on long-term savings, allowing investments to grow more efficiently over time. Of course, the best approach depends on individual circumstances, which is why these examples are meant only as illustrations rather than specific recommendations. Finally, there is the question of maintaining the gap between income and spending. Wealth building rarely depends on a single breakthrough decision. More often it comes from protecting the difference between what you earn and what you spend. Some people try to achieve this only by increasing income. Others focus entirely on cutting expenses. In practice, both forces matter. Increasing income through skill development. Career advancement or additional opportunities can expand the resources available for saving and investing. At the same time, controlling lifestyle expansion helps ensure that higher earnings translate into actual wealth rather than simply higher consumption. The most sustainable path often combines both approaches. Over time, that growing gap becomes the fuel for investment, and investment becomes the engine that drives long-term financial growth. Now step back and look at the full picture. Two people can move through the same economy for 30 or 40 years. They can face similar job markets, similar housing costs, and similar opportunities. On paper, their financial lives might even look almost identical in the beginning. But the outcomes slowly drift apart. One person allows most of their income to pass straight through their hands. Raises turn into lifestyle upgrades. Small purchases accumulate quietly in the background. Money arrives, money leaves, and the long-term picture changes very little. Another person follows a slightly different pattern. They track their net worth occasionally. They automate part of their savings. They allow their lifestyle to grow, but not as quickly as their income. They place some of their money into investments and simply give it time to grow. Neither path feels dramatic in the moment. The difference only becomes visible years later. One person reaches their 60s with a net worth around $400,000, which is close to the median outcome for many households. The other may arrive in that same stage of life with more than $1.6 million, not because they discovered a secret investment, not because they perfectly predicted the market, and often not because they earned dramatically more income. The difference comes from decisions repeated quietly over time, small choices about spending, small habits around saving, small systems that allow money to grow rather than disappear. Wealth in most cases is not built through sudden breakthroughs. It grows slowly through consistency. If there is one idea to take away from this discussion, it might be this: the most powerful financial decisions are often the ones that feel the least dramatic. Track where your money is going. Protect the gap between income and spending. Allow time and compounding to do their work. And again, remember that this discussion is not professional financial advice. These are simply examples meant to make the mechanics of money easier to understand. If you found this breakdown helpful, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future discussions about how financial decisions shape long-term outcomes. And I'm curious about your perspective. What financial habit has had the biggest impact on your life so far?